Once Upon a Time in America, the two-part 6-hour cut. The 1984 epic Once Upon a Time in America is considered by many to be Sergio Leone's definitive masterpiece. Because of distribution interference, the film suffered a lot of re-edits and mediocre reception upon release. Currently there exists 3 versions of the film, the US theatrical version, the European theatrical version, and the extended cut that is more faithful to Leone's original vision, with an additional 4th USSR version that some people may not know about. The film gained a mediocre reception at several sneak peek premieres in North America. Because of this early audience reaction, the fear of its length, its graphic violence, and the inability of theatres to have multiple showings in one day, the decision was made by the Lad Company to make many edits and cut entire scenes without the supervision of Leone. This American-wide release, running at 139 minutes, was drastically different from the European release, as the non-chronological story was rearranged into chronological order. Other major cuts involved many of the childhood sequences, making the adult 1933 sections more prominent. Noodle's 1968 meeting with Deborah was excised, and the scene with Bailey ends with him shooting himself, the sound of a gunshot off screen, rather than the garbage truck conclusion of the 229-minute version. The 229-minute version released in Europe was much better received, and is considered by some to be the best version of the film. In 2011, it was announced that the recovery of some of the cut footage would allow Leone's children, after acquiring the distribution rights, to oversee the creation of a 269-minute version, further repairing their father's vision. However, when it premiered at Cannes in 2012, 29 minutes was still missing. This version was pulled shortly after premiere so Martin Scorsese could help secure the rights to the missing scenes. The 251-minute extended director's cut was still released on Blu-ray and DVD in 2014. As of 2021, the 269-minute cut remains unreleased due to the rights issues. The USSR version was rearranged into chronological order and split into 2 parts, released as separate films. Neither of these cuts are known to exist anymore, but there is a small possibility they are preserved in an archive somewhere where the USSR used to be, unavailable publicly. Because of all this hassle, the original 6-hour version that Leone originally intended to be released is not known to have survived. Because of the fact it was fully shot and edited, it's possible that Leone saved a copy for himself, but its whereabouts are unknown. Not even Leone's children appear to have access to it. What does exist? Currently, the closest thing we have to Leone's original vision is the 251-minute extended cut, as well as the yet-to-be-released 269-minute cut we know for a fact exists. It is truly unknown if the 6-hour print even survived, as none of the remaining 91 minutes has been announced as found. Given that it was supposed to be 2 parts 3 hours each, it's possible that 2 prints exist, and 2 prints are more difficult to preserve than 1. We'll just have to wait and see. Why would I like to see it? I personally don't like Mr. Leone all that much. Based on the words of people he worked with, he was a very rude, selfish, horrible man that put his actors through hell. I couldn't care less about what he wanted out of this film, and I already think it's pretty fantastic on its own, but it would still be interesting to see what a whole cut 2 hours looks like. Regardless of my opinions on Leone personally, he was still a brilliant filmmaker, so chances are I'd still enjoy it considerably. I hope Andrea, Francesca, and Raffaella find it and get permission to release it one day. American Dog. American Dog was a Disney animated film written and directed by Chris Sanders, which was due to be released in 2007. The plot was to follow Henry, a famous TV dog that gets stranded in the Nevada desert after one of his stunts goes horribly wrong, with no memory as to how he got there. His 2,000-mile trek across the real world is just the beginning of an adventure of self-discovery. Executives deemed the film too surreal and too bold to be enjoyed by general audiences. Sanders reportedly refused to listen to advice given by the executives on how to fix the film, or make it more basic for general audiences, which led to Sanders ultimately being kicked off the team. John Lasseter gave the usual, "he's talented, but not the talented we need" excuse for Sanders' dismissal. The film's concepts later became realised in 2008's animated feature film Bolt, which was finished in 18 months instead of the usual 4 years it takes to make a CGI feature. This incident hurt Sanders' relationship with Disney, and he ultimately left the company to join their rival, DreamWorks Animation. As of 2021, the original film has remained incomplete, and rights issues will most likely keep it that way. What does exist? Unfortunately, very little production material and artwork for American Dog has actually surfaced. Most likely due to Disney quite literally stealing a creation away from its sole maker, it didn't receive any acknowledgement on Bolt's home media release. At least not to my knowledge. A few pieces of concept art, as well as a brief, fully animated reel depicting Henry waking up on a train is publicly available, with no further leaks or official releases. Sanders honoured American Dog in his webcomic Kiskaloo, which featured an eye patch wearing cat similar to the one that was supposed to be the deuteragonist of American Dog. Why would I like to see it? I'm really not that keen on Bolt, and American Dog just sounds like a more fun and interesting idea. Plus, Chris Sanders really got kicked in the ass on this deal. I think it'd be nice to see what he intended, not what a multi-billion-dollar corporation wanted him to do. This seems like something that would have been a fun watch. The Thing. Pilot cut. The Thing from 2011 is a mixed film to say the least. A prequel to the 1982 version, a majority of critics and fans have a begrudging relationship with it, mainly due to its plot, continuity errors with the original, and the weak CGI. Some have even gone on to call it a remake hiding under the guise of a prequel, given its many references to the original being interpreted as mere redos. I personally enjoy the movie. It's not perfect and the special effects do let the film down, but it has atmosphere, interesting characters, good acting, and the story, despite how flawed it may be in some places, does a good job for the most part as a setup to the original. But the story behind the film is an even sadder one. The practical effects were digitally covered by CGI for two main reasons. Firstly, executives believed the pilot cut of the film looked outdated and cheap, and demanded that all practical effects be replaced with CGI. Secondly, test audiences reacted negatively to the original ending, which featured an alien pilot creature, and the director, Mathis van Heijningen Jr., I think, believed that since Kate was looking for Sander, it would be better for him to be the alien form she confronts. This was another excuse for most of the other practical effects to be replaced. The final version of the film is referred to as the Sander cut, as the Sander thing is considered to be reflective of the film's CGI. Absolutely terrible. Given the short amount of time that Imagine Engine had to do their job, the end result isn't very good, and impaired Amalgamated Dynamics' original vision horribly. A lot of the film was generally reshot as well, which was apparently done to improve the pacing and polish some of the character-driven moments. It's believed that the original pilot cut still exists somewhere in Universal's archives, but it has never been released, not even on the special edition double release of the two Thing movies. What does exist? The original trailer shown a year prior to the film's release features brief fragments of an alternate scene between Kate and Adam, where they meet in a coffee shop. It's possible this was reshot to further add to the feeling of isolation, making the security guard who alerts Kate of Adam's presence in the morgue the only character not to be in Antarctica by the end of the film. The trailer also contains a brief shot of the original pilot Thing as it menaces on Kate. In 2015, Studio ADI, Amalgamated's official YouTube channel, began uploading behind-the-scenes videos depicting the original practical effects of all the creatures featured in the film. Fans and critics of the film reacted positively, further sparking hope that the original vision may be made fully public one day. Why would I like to see it? The people involved, particularly Amalgamated, really got screwed over by studio pestering. The practical effects actually look great in the videos they're shown in. Besides the story, all that really holds the film back is the CGI. It'd be a much better, creepier film, and it's already pretty atmospheric in my opinion. Even based on the mostly silent fragments, the scenes just seem better. The opening scene in the cafe, Adam's reactions to Edvard, Kate's fight with the pilot Thing. I think it'd be a much more enjoyable experience. Dracula's death. Although 1922's Nosferatu is considered to be the first ever, albeit unofficially and copyright infringement made, true depiction of Bram Stoker's classic novel Dracula, Dracula's death, also known as Dracula halala, technically marks the first ever on-screen depiction of the actual Count himself. Despite this, the film's plot doesn't even remotely resemble the original book. A woman experiences frightening visions after being admitted to an insane asylum, where one of the inmates claims to be Count Dracula. She has trouble determining whether the inmate's visions are real or merely nightmares. The inmate is a leering figure, thin and pale with a widow's peak, pointy ears and sharp teeth, as he appears in one of the two existing stills, apparently wearing a cape or cloak. The poster actually shows a grey-skinned monster with fangs and talons. that isn't actually present in the film. He appears to her in her dreams when she sleeps. Eventually she escapes the asylum and later gets married, but the dreams continue to haunt her. After opening in Vienna in 1921, the film had a long and successful European run. It was later re-edited and re-released in Budapest in 1923, but faded into obscurity, and remains lost to this day. According to film critic Troy Howarth, a print exists in a Hungarian archive, but the film has yet to be released publicly. If the film is recovered, it is more likely the edited version would be found, leaving the original cut completely lost. It's worth noting that there are mentions of a Russian Dracula film made in 1920 that predates this one, but there is virtually no information about it and its existence is unconfirmed.
What does exist?
As well as a promotional photograph of Paul Asconas as Dracula, the only surviving elements of Dracula's death are two production stills, with one famously depicting the frightened, unnamed protagonist fearfully gazing upon Dracula at her asylum room's window, and the other depicting one of the woman's nightmares.
Why would I like to see it?
Based on only two existing photographs, this film seems like a really weird, gothic, enjoyable nightmare ride that any horror enthusiast like myself could enjoy. The story also sounds really interesting and I'd like to see how it plays out. Good or bad. The Golem and the Golem and the Dancing Girl. The Golem and the Golem and the Dancing Girl are the first two installments in Paul Wegener's Golem trilogy. The Golem has been described as a fairly simple silent horror film about an antique dealer who discovers a golem, a clay statue that, when brought to life using a magical amulet, does one's bidding. The golem instead falls in love with the dealer's daughter and goes on a rampage when she doesn't return his love. Although the plot for The Dancing Girl is largely unknown, it has been described as the very first horror spoof ever created, as it took a much more comedic tone while retaining the natural horror that was the golem himself, who, in my opinion, is a very underrated monster. There is actually debate over whether Wegener played the golem as he did in the first and third films, with the role presumably having been played by co-director Rokas Glees. One of the few surviving photographs used on Wikipedia does show a golem that looks somewhat different to Wegener, although the picture could possibly be of a prop golem. As of 2021, only the 1920 finale The Golem: How He Came Into the World survives, leaving the trilogy incomplete. Professor Elizabeth Baer notes in her book The Golem Redux: From Prague to Post-Holocaust Fiction that Donald Gluck claimed in The Frankenstein Legend that European film collector Paul Surlander, I definitely butchered that, tracked down a complete print in 1958. Baer is careful, however, to point out that Gluck provided no source for this information. As for Dancing Girl, SilentEra.com also believes that a print of the film could be held in an Eastern European archive, but this is yet to be confirmed.
What does exist?
Fortunately, 108 meter fragments, or 4 minutes and 1 second, exist for 1915's The Golem. It mainly focuses on the climax, where a stabbed golem chases fleeing guests at some kind of mansion party, before he ultimately falls to his death. There is also a brief segment which shows the golem doing his first set of chores for the antique dealer. A few production stills also exist, but they are few in numbers. The Golem and the Dancing Girl has mostly vanished from existence, which film historians see as a shame. All that exists to preserve the film's physical existence is the original poster and some photographs.
Why would I like to see it?
The Golem, the 1921, is one of my favourite silent films. It's simply a masterpiece, and to see where it originated from would be really fun, especially since almost nothing is known about the second one, which just makes it all the more fascinating to me. I just wish they'd been preserved, or the people who supposedly have copies of them to come forward and make them available. Plus, like I said earlier, the Golem is an underrated monster, and he needs more recognition. The Shadow King. Henry Selick's The Shadow King has been described by some as the greatest film never made. After leaving Laika in 2009 shortly after Coraline's release, he signed up with Disney and Pixar in 2010 on a contract to exclusively produce stop-motion films. This not only returned Selick to his roots, but also reunited him with several old friends and co-workers. His new studio, called Productions, was self-described as a new stop-motion company whose mandate is to make great, scary films for young'uns with a small, tight-knit crew who watch each other's backs. Selleck and Cinderbiter's first film under this deal, a project tentatively called Shademaker, was set to be released in late 2013. In 2011, Shademaker, now known as The Shadow King, was greenlit for production. The story is about a 9-year-old orphan named Hap with unusually long fingers he conceals in oversized jumper sleeves. When he becomes enveloped in shadow puppetry thanks to a living shadow girl, he turns his freakish hands into incredible weapons to try and stop a ravenous monster bent on killing his brother Richard and destroying New York. In 2012, it was reported that after spending a reported $50 million on the project, Walt Disney Pictures cancelled it due to a creative and scheduling standpoint, and the pick wasn't where it needed to be to meet its planned release date. In reality, Selleck and his team needed time to make the film the best it could be, but the company had become impatient with their set release date. And after a change in management, it was decided by the new chairman of Disney Studios, Alan Horn, that children would be more interested in buying toys of already existing and brightly coloured properties instead of intentionally creepy and stylized original ones. 150 people lost their jobs, and Finding Nemo in 3D became the main promotional concern. Selleck was given the option to shop the project to another studio, and after Leica rejected the project due to cost concerns, it was shipped to the European film market. Despite it being reported in 2016 that the project was back on track, the sets and puppets have reportedly been destroyed, leaving the film forever incomplete, with Selleck working towards completing Netflix's Wendell and Wild for 2021, his first widely released project in 12 years.
What does exist?
Although The Shadow King is forever unfinished, large chunks of the movie exist online thanks to people who worked on it. This includes complete and semi-complete film reels focusing on Hap and his brother Richard, some test shots that also include a comically bulky hotel concierge character that would harass Hap and Richard for causing trouble, and various behind-the-scenes production stills and pieces of concept art. Since Selleck is most likely the sole owner of the film's existing assets, it is entirely possible that an incomplete version of the film with storyboards combined with what exists of it could be released publicly someday, or better yet, someone might pick it up and give it new life again, but the latter seems much more unlikely.
Why would I like to see it?
Henry Selick is easily one of my favourite directors. It's been years since his last wide release, and he made two of my favourite animated films of all time, Coraline and The Nightmare Before Christmas. He got screwed over, and I'd love for his idea to be fully available one day, even if it isn't finished. Also, it just seems like a really strange, fun, and interesting film that people could enjoy. Who doesn't love some good old-fashioned dark fantasy done right?
Scooby-Doo, the R-rated cut. When Scooby-Doo was first being developed in the late 90s, it was originally envisioned with a more satirical tone towards the original franchise, with Shaggy being a stoner and Velma and Daphne being lesbians. This version of the film went as far as being submitted for MPAA approval. Although it was predicted to be PG-13 aimed at a slightly older audience, it received an unexpected R rating due to a joke that the MPAA misunderstood as referring to oral sex, according to the film's writer James Gunn. Because of this, the studio ordered the film to be extensively edited, making the tone more lighthearted and earning the film a family-friendly PG rating. And all this because 3 parents were outraged by a simple joke they didn't understand properly. Some scenes featuring the female characters with large amounts of cleavage were re-edited with CGI to cover their skin. Although only rumoured to exist for over a decade, James Gunn finally confirmed on a 2017 Facebook post celebrating the film's 15th anniversary that a feature-length R-rated cut did in fact exist. Although there's a small chance it remains in the Warner Bros. Vault, Gunn said that he doubts the full cut still exists anymore, with the release of 2020's Scoob setting the franchise back on a definitively kid-friendly direction, making it more likely that if it does still exist, it won't be made publicly available anytime soon. Fans still hope it'll be released one day, mainly to experience the original vision intended for the film. Although the full R-rated cut might not exist anymore, it's entirely possible that the scenes cut from the film do, and could be implemented into the final product to restore the original vision. What does exist?
Some jokes and scenes from the original cut were repurposed for the final product, such as a joke about Mary Jane, a slang for marijuana, being Shaggy's favourite name, as well as some general scenes that clearly display the more adult theme, as the entire film simply would have been too difficult to completely reshoot, not to mention beyond expensive. A joke about Daphne being anorexic could also be from the original cut, as this is far less likely to be written into a family-friendly Scooby-Doo film made for children from the get-go. Gunn did hint, however, that if Raja Gosnell, the film's director, approves, then the R-rated cut could be released.
Why would I like to see it?
This version of the movie honestly sounds hilarious.
I would love to see what kind of film it would be and whether it worked or not. It's a shame that a line alluding to oral sex is all it took to get this version completely axed from public release. It just goes to show how sensitive some parents and studios really are that they completely change a movie from what it's supposed to be. Also, with an older mindset watching it a few months ago, I can kind of tell it's been awkwardly reworked from something else. It'd definitely help knowing what it's supposed to be like. The Thing. Deleted scenes. The Thing is considered by many to be John Carpenter's magnum opus, despite the very negative reception upon its initial release in 1982, mainly focusing on its excessive violence and poor characterization. One critic even described it as instant junk, and it performed moderately or poorly at the box office, depending on who you ask. After receiving a home media release and being syndicated on television for years, it gained a cult following, and has been re-evaluated as one of the greatest horror and sci-fi films ever made, as well as my one and only favourite horror film. The plot concerns a parasitic alien that infiltrates Outpost 31, an American Antarctic research facility. During post-production, several scenes/fragments littered the cutting room floor, and only a few have been officially released onto DVD, such as the stop-motion Blair Thing, and some have been included on the syndicated cut of the film, which has been poorly received for changing the film's aspect ratio and lowering its quality, ruining many of the visual moments, as well as adding unnecessary narration. Carpenter himself disapproves of this edit, as well as its ending that implies the Thing definitely survived, which removes a lot of the mystery. This is where things get a little complicated because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to these still missing cut moments. Even the collector's edition Blu-ray gives a small glimpse into what was really pulled from the final product. All that exists for these scenes I'm about to talk about are production stills and still frames, and I'll be specifying what's known about them. I'll also add personal speculation on why some of them may have been cut. For a scene I simply can't decipher why, I'll just say it's unknown. Macready's original introduction saw Norris going into Macready's cabin to alert him of the Norwegian helicopter circling the camp. It is unknown why it was cut. A short shock sequence was cut from the Norwegian camp scene that depicted a mutilated corpse falling from a cupboard. It was most likely cut in favour of the shock sequence of a razor blade suicide victim, as well as the discovery of split face moments later. Most infamously, there was a cutscene where Macready studies the Norwegian tapes and plays computer chess while in front of a blow-up sex doll. It is unknown why the scene was cut, although it was possibly to keep the film more serious in tone. A similar scene was shot of Copper and Fuchs studying the Norwegian tapes themselves. It's unknown why it was cut. A scene where the crew have a drink in the dining area was cut for unknown reasons, and the room was never seen in the final product. A shot depicting Fuchs sedating one of the surviving dogs was cut presumably so they could instead use the scene where Blair and Clark sedate a dog, and Clark is first made suspicious. In the final cut of the film, Bennings is assimilated and the Bennings thing is burned in the snow. Originally, Bennings was to enter the kennels and be stabbed in the neck with a screwdriver by an unknown individual, possibly Norris or Palmer, who he believed to be Clark. The scene was most likely cut so they could use the Bennings thing, and it wouldn't make sense for a parasitic alien to stab someone to death instead of assimilating them. The scene where Bennings finds someone tampering with the supplies most likely originally existed to lead up to this death. There exists a photograph of Blair tying a noose later seen in the movie, as if to imply he wanted to hang himself whilst locked outside in the shed. It's unknown what exactly the scene was, or if it was simply a promotional still. If it was in fact a scene, my theory would be that it was either the scene where Macready asks Blair if he's seen Fuchs, an alternative version that is, or it was an entirely different scene that ended with the indication being Blair is assimilated. Or perhaps an already assimilated Blair is cleverly tying the noose to earn sympathy points and be let back inside, where it can spread. If either of the latter two are correct, it's entirely possible that the scene was cut so that Blair's identity would remain more of a mystery. During the search party for Fuchs, there was a cut sequence where Palmer and Childs contemplate burning their marijuana plants in the greenhouse, as they fear the broken roof indicates the thing got in and infected them, as plants are living organisms. They then discover Fuchs impaled on a shovel and leave to alert the rest of the group. This particular moment had a comedic tone up until the shock of finding their dead friend. One can only assume it was cut so they could use the charred corpse fate and to keep the tone of the film more serious. This scene also wouldn't make sense in terms of plot, as Palmer, who is most likely infected at this point, didn't think to assimilate Charles, despite them being alone together. Another cutscene showed us what happened when Macready and Niles entered Macready's shack, only to discover the roof caved in. At this point, the sex doll from earlier becomes dislodged and the shocked men go to attack it before realizing their mistake. The scene could have possibly ended with Niles finding the shredded clothes he later presents to the other survivors. If the latter is true, the scene could have been cut to keep a greater mystery to the film. Or the sex doll scene from earlier was cut first, and the joke of the scene didn't make sense without the setup. Or perhaps it just dragged away from the main plot too much. A couple production stills suggest that the Fuke scene was originally shot differently without a blizzard, as the charred corpse isn't buried in the snow as much. Two production stills exist, showing a different version of the Palmer thing. The first is simply a normal looking Palmer thing covered in blood from a gash on the top of his head, cornering a terrified Windows. It is possible that this is actually from a test shot for the actual scene itself. The other depicts the original Palmer thing, which still has a distinct split down its head, but with a more humanoid, slightly goofy looking appearance, and a laser protruding from its open wound. This was most likely cut and replaced with the final product, as one look at it makes it certain that it just wasn't very good. A shot of Niles sitting on some barrels in the generator room apparently exists, but was unused. The still photograph was used on the promotional poster, hinting it may simply have been a cast photo of TK Carter. Carpenter filmed two alternate endings to the film, one of which was only filmed in case executives didn't like the one that was ultimately used. In the executive-friendly ending, Macready awaits his death in the cold, but is found just in time by the rescue team, who attempt to confirm his identity with a blood test. It is still left ambiguous, although Macready more than likely survived. It is unknown what happens to Charles in this ending, as he isn't featured in the still photograph that proves this ending's existence. Although it made it as far as test screenings, audiences seem to prefer the more nihilistic ending, so that was used instead, and this one was discarded. The second ending was a scene that has never been shown publicly, removing Childs completely, as he was a victim of the thing at this point. It's unknown what the scene would have entailed, as Macready would have either died alone or been rescued, without an additional character to make the scene more interesting. It's unknown why the ending was filmed in the first place, possibly in case audiences didn't appreciate Childs' appearance at the end of the film. No photograph has ever surfaced, leaving the ending and its fate largely unknown. As of 2021, these scenes remain unavailable beyond the stills and promotional material. Perhaps Carpenter or Universal are still in possession of the scenes, or a work print cut of the film with the missing scenes may exist somewhere, but this is unconfirmed. Why would I like to see it? The Thing is one of my favourite movies of all time, not just horror, and to see these missing fragments, even if they were in poor quality or just aren't very good, would be fun. I wouldn't even mind seeing them edited into the actual movie, even if it ruined the pacing or the tone. Again, I just think it'd be a lot of fun. London After Midnight. London After Midnight, also released under The Hypnotist, is a 1927 silent film directed by Todd Browning and starring Lon Chaney, otherwise known as the Man of a Thousand Faces. Contrary to popular belief, London After Midnight isn't exactly a horror film, but rather a detective mystery with horror elements, namely the man in the beaver hat, the fang-mouthed, pale-faced vampire in a black top hat that can be seen on the famous poster and production stills. Critics and audiences at the time praised the film for its scariness and performances, but complained that the plot was complicated, nonsensical, and hard to follow. The film's plot concerns Edward C. Burke, an inspector who attempts to reproduce a crime scene from 5 years ago in order to solve a suicide he suspects was actually a murder. It's also famous for being the one and only time Chaney used his iconic makeup case as an on-screen prop, when Burke reveals he was the man in the beaver hat the whole time. Believe it or not, but the poster itself sold for a record-breaking $478,000, as it is one of the last physical pieces of evidence that the film even happened. Sadly, London After Midnight was lost when the last known copy was burned in the 1965 MGM Vault fire. London After Midnight wasn't the only one affected. The last known copies of hundreds of other early rare films were also lost in the fire. As early as 1997, a private collector offered to transfer a copy of the film to a then state-of-the-art D1, but when the time came to produce the print, they backed out. In 2017, a rumour surfaced that a print of the film existed in a film vault in Spain, but when Robert Parigi investigated the rumour, he found nothing. There are rumours that copies of the film still exist in private collections somewhere, but as of 2021, that is all just hearsay. What does exist?
In 1935,
almost 3 decades before the film was even considered lost, Todd Browning remade the film as Mark of the Vampire, a sound version starring Bela Lugosi as the vampiric menace, although upon viewing it, it's abundantly clear the film mainly exists to cash in on the hype surrounding Lugosi's iconic portrayal of Dracula. In 1995, nitrate frames of the film were located in the Canary Islands. They were apparently cut from a trailer by a projectionist, but no one is exactly sure where they came from. In 2002, Rick Schmidlin and Turner Classic Movies produced a 45-minute reconstruction of the film, using production stills and a recreation of the original soundtrack. This version can be found on the Lon Chaney Collection DVD, and can even be viewed in full for free on YouTube. Why would I like to see it? The Man in the Beaver Hat is such an iconic horror figure, I'd love to see him in action. Even if an incomplete print or some clips showing him are found, that'd be good enough for me.
The Power of the Daleks, Episode 1. Like all Doctor Who fans, I would love for all, if not most of the missing episodes to be found one day, mainly from the Patrick Troughton era, as he is missing 53 episodes, as opposed to William Hartnell's 44. If I had to choose one particular episode, however, it would probably be The Power of the Daleks Episode 1. Not only is it Troughton's first time starring as the titular Time Lord, but it serves as a brilliant introduction to his character, and as a setup for a much larger 6-part adventure full of creepy Daleks, political power struggles, and haunting music. It works perfectly. Unfortunately, as with a fair few serials from the black and white era of the show, The Power of the Daleks is completely missing from the BBC archives. The original master tapes were wiped in the late 60s, the additional 35mm negative of episode 6 was junked sometime before 1970, the original 16mm copies were destroyed in 1974, the Australian copy was returned to the BBC and junked in 1975, and the fate of the New Zealand copy that wound up in Singapore in 1972 is unknown. It was either returned to the BBC, for which no documentation exists, or it was destroyed, which seems to be the more likely option. There is a small possibility that it may have been preserved completely by accident, as was the case with The Enemy of the World and The Web of Fear in Nigeria, or that the episodes were somehow secured by private collectors, such as The Underwater Menace Episode 2 and Galaxy 4 Episode 3. Philip Morris claimed in an interview that at least 6 episodes considered missing do exist in private collections, but the exact episodes and their return to the archives remains to be seen.
What does exist?
The evening before Episode 1's original broadcast, the BBC showed a narrated trailer containing 19 seconds worth of footage when the Doctor, Ben and Polly uncover the Daleks in the space capsule. This is the only 16mm high quality clip that exists for that episode. 8mm clips recorded off-air by an unknown fan in Australia exist for episodes 1 and 2. Due to their low quality, fan-made reconstructions sometimes link the clips with the incorrect audio. Episode 3, unfortunately, has no surviving footage. Clips from Episode 4 survive from the ABC programme Perspectives, as well as 2 clips from Episode 5. A 40-second clip from Episode 5 was used in Wicker's World and survives as a result. The reprise of the scene in Episode 6 also survives, as well as an effects sequence when the Daleks are destroyed. All of these clips, save some from Episode 4 found on an archived episode of the programme Tomorrow's World in 2005, are available on the Lost in Time DVD box set released in 2004. The clips that were found on Tomorrow's World are available on the Genesis of the Daleks and the Power of the Daleks DVD releases. In 2020, extremely brief film trims from episodes 4 and 5 were purchased at an auction and posted on Twitter by James Johnson, containing never-before-seen shots and camera angles that are absent from the telesnaps. After being converted to motion in a GIF format, fans concluded that they are most likely alternative takes or unused insert shots, but it's an interesting find regardless. Thanks to John Shearer, full sets of telesnaps exist for all the missing episodes. High-quality audio recordings also exist for the story, thanks to Graham Strong. The Loose Cannon team reconstructed the serial's LC-10, and actually released it on VHS. This would be their one and only physical release, however, and the tape is very difficult to come by, as it is technically illegal to purchase and own. The audio cassette was first released in 1993, featuring linking narration by Tom Baker in character as the Fourth Doctor. The audio quality was particularly poor, however, making some parts of the story impossible to understand. When the master tapes for the recordings by Baker were, ironically enough, wiped by the BBC,
They opted to bring Anika Wills in for a high quality release in 2003. It was originally impossible to find without being tied to the evil of the Daleks, until a solo version was finally released in 2004. In 2005, BBC Audiobooks released an official photographic reconstruction in MP3 CD format under the title Doctor Who Reconstructed: The Power of the Daleks. In 2016, the BBC discontinued their 50% or less rule for reconstructing missing episodes using animation, and all 6 episodes were recreated in black and white, with the episodes being released on iTunes weekly from the 5th of November to the 10th of December, 50 years to the serial's original broadcast dates. The story was subsequently released on DVD. On the 31st of December, a colour version of the animation was released on the BBC store, followed by a special edition Blu-ray in early 2017 containing the black and white and colour animations. In 2020, an updated version of the animation featuring an option of black and white and colour was released on DVD and Blu-ray, alongside a telesnap reconstruction of the story for the die-hard fans that refuse to watch anything that isn't the original episodes as they were meant to be seen. This release also contains a newly discovered, higher quality version of a surviving clip from episode 6, focusing on the Daleks chanting as they leave the capsule, and it even includes the opening theme and the episode title. Why would I like to see it? The Second Doctor is my favourite. Patrick Troughton is one of my favourite actors, and this is easily my favourite serial from the classic era. Episode 1, being a brilliant, well-written episode on its own right, is an excellent first for Troughton, and to see it for the first time would be fantasy come to reality.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why don't you leave it a like and subscribe to the channel, and check out some of my other videos.